Welcome to another parent-teacher video lesson from the earlygiftedmanual.com, a free website for homeschooled children 3 to 7 years old and their parents that promotes and develops giftedness at an early age. I am Gary Blank, the creator of that site, and your host and facilitator for this video and all of the videos in my educational program. As the video lessons are designed to work in conjunction with the program on my website, I ask you to, at some point, click on the URL link in the description box below, and this action will take you to the earlygiftedmanual.com. By doing that, you will be able to put this lesson and all of the video lessons here on my channel in the proper context of the total program that I am presenting to you and your child. And once your child has learned how to tell time or read time on the analog clock, you could do this exercise. I call it 1 day on the clock, on the analog clock. And as you know, as an adult, the day starts at midnight, and this is a tough one for kids because they believe the day starts when they get up in the morning. So you'll have to explain to them, and as you can see, I've set the hands right to midnight here, and you could tell your child, well, the 24-hour day actually begins while you're sleeping, and it's what we call 12 o'clock at night, or you can use the word midnight. And from there, you can start manipulating the clock through an entire 24-hour day and talking about what your child might be doing at that particular time. So we'll start like this. And you could say, well, you know that you're sleeping. Oh, maybe you had a dream right there. Maybe you had another dream. So obviously the first part of this is all times when he's sleeping, and you could start using some vocabulary as you're doing this. Like you can say, well, we call this night, and you could use the word overnight. And of course, as we get into the morning here, you can use those words: morning, afternoon, evening, all great vocabulary words that your child can learn in this exercise. So here we're going through the night, and look, now it's getting light out. The sun has come up, and perhaps somewhere in here, maybe around 7-ish or so, as we adults like to say, you can say, well, look, now you're getting out of bed, and you're waking up, and let's say the two of you are putting together your breakfast, and you're eating breakfast, and let's say now you're taking a shower perhaps, and as we get to 9 in the morning, perhaps you and your mom are looking at a book together or doing some studies from the Early Gifted Manual, and on it goes. Let's say maybe at 10, that's the time you usually go to the park. So 10 in the morning, you're in the park maybe for an hour, and then you come back, and maybe it's time for your child to play with blocks or other manipulatives, or do some other kind of play indoors. And then you could say, well, right about this time, as you get close to 12, and you could say, we call that noon. There's a word for that. Maybe it's, that's around when you have your lunch. And you could go past 12, and you could say, look, there's no 13 in the 24 hours of the day. Now we're going to go through the whole cycle one more time from 12 all the way through the numbers and back to 12. So there's 2 12-hour cycles. That's important for your child to understand that. And of course, you could go through all the things you do in the afternoon, in the evening, And, everybody delineates afternoon and evening differently. I might say afternoon goes till 6. The evening, some people will say the evening goes all the way to midnight, or you might think the evening only goes till 9 or 10. That's okay. But point out those hours to your child, and use that terminology, night, morning, afternoon, evening, noon, midnight, all these great time vocabulary words. All right. One of the things you can do after you've done this a few times with your child, I'm not going to go through the all the way to midnight again, because you get the idea here. So one of the things you can do working with this exercise we call One Day on the Analog Clock is, after you've done it a few times, your child, then make it interactive. You could ask him questions like, let's say you're going through the night and you're to the morning here. You could say, well, at 7:30 in the morning, what are you doing? And hopefully he will have seen this enough times where he could say, well, that's about the time that we're having breakfast, right? And you could ask him some other questions as you go through the day. And you could frame that question in a different way, kind of flip it a little bit, and say, what time is it when you are at the park? Well, of course, that makes it a little more difficult. And, hopefully she will know, well, that's, around 10 o'clock or around 11 o'clock in the morning. So you work with this, and it's, it's not a short road, as I've said so many times. It'll take a while, but if you keep working with this, the analog clock here, and what I call One Day on the Analog Clock, pretty soon your child will become very comfortable with all of these concepts, and will be able to know what time it is when he or she is doing something. Or if you ask him, what are you doing at 3 in the afternoon, they'll have a pretty good idea. And of course, that leads us to the time concept of, some events always happen at around the same time every day, and of course others do not. So you can talk to him or her a little bit about that. Like, for example, you usually have breakfast around the same time. He probably usually goes to bed around the same time. Perhaps you may go to the park every day around the same time. But then you can explain to him that other events do not always happen at the same time of day. For example, on a particular day, you might change your schedule a little bit and have lunch a little bit earlier than you normally would. Or perhaps you couldn't get to the park till the afternoon on that day. So explain that to your child, that some events always happen generally at the same time of each day, and others do not. Sometimes you have to run out to the grocery store, at a time of day that you normally wouldn't go. So that's also an important time concept. And let's just briefly bring this out here, the concept of AM and PM. And I'll write those out for you here. AM and PM. And those are abbreviations. This one is I hope I pronounce this correctly. It's Latin. That's not exactly my forte. Antemeridium, and that's midnight to before noon. So 12 to 12 in that time frame. A PM is post meridium, and of course you could say these to your child. They may or may not remember them, but you can point out that PM is afternoon to midnight, and you can introduce these as you're having your child write out various times. You could say, well, now I want you not only to write out the time, but whether it's AM or PM. And sometimes they look like this. I've seen them written like this, lowercase with no periods, whichever you prefer. So a good time to introduce those concepts, AM and PM. And finally, one more thing you could do with the analog clock is you could do an exercise that I call in 1 hour it will be, and 1 hour earlier it was. So you could say, you could do this. You could ask your child, what time is it? And of course she will know, she'll say, it's 11 o'clock. And you could say, well, in 1 hour, what time will it be? So now, that's obviously a step up in their understanding of time, and hopefully she will say 12 o'clock. And you could ask him, well, what time was it 1 hour earlier than this? And hopefully he would say 10 o'clock. So obviously that's another level up in understanding of time keeping and telling the time, that they can visualize that concept. So I thought we might look at some other types of timepieces, and certainly if you have any of these around, I'll show you these shortly. If you have any of these around, you can show your child, talk about them, talk about exactly what they do and what their purpose is, and it will increase their knowledge of this concept of keeping time and time concepts. Let's start out with this. This is my alarm clock, and as you can see, it's an analog clock. And of course, there are digital alarm clocks, and there are many devices have alarms on them. My wristwatch does, and other devices. So you can just tell your child that with this kind of clock, there's a hand, you can barely see it there, it's around the 7, that you can set, and an alarm will go off at that time, either to wake you up in the morning or to alert you of something you need to do. So that's an alarm clock. We have this digital timer, which has, a bit of a different function. One of the things you can do is you can set a time. I'm going to do that right now. Let's say 2 minutes, and start it, and it will count down that time for you, and there will be an alarm. So that's one way you can use this. Another way, here, let me stop it here. There we go. And another way is you can just start it like this from 0 and have it just record the amount of time that's elapsing. And of course, you'll have to manually turn it off when you use this mode. So, sometimes they call it a stopwatch, digital timer. It has different names, but this can be very handy for certain tasks. So let me turn that off. Let's see, what else do I have on my table here? This is a wonderful tool. I call it a pie timer. I don't know if anybody else calls it that, but that's what I call it. And why is it a pie timer? Well, I'll show you. You can pull this out here. Let's say you want, you're telling your child you have 15 minutes to get ready for school. This pie timer, this red will work its way back here, and the piece of red pie will slowly shrink. So in effect, your child could look at this and see the elapsed time, a very, very clear way of showing them how time is elapsing and what they need to do to be ready for school when this red piece of the pie here finally disappears. I love these. These really came in handy in my kindergarten classes for all kinds of things. Anytime you want to have a timed activity, or anytime you want to give your child a notice of they're running out of time for a certain task and you're going to move on, highly recommended. I call them pie timers, and they're wonderful, wonderful thing to have. All right. There's the alarm on the Pi timer. Let's see, what do I have left here? Oh, of course, my wristwatch. And actually, I have to show it like this, otherwise it's upside down. But that's okay, I will show it to you upside down. And you can just tell your child that's just like having a portable clock with you that you can take with you wherever you go, and make sure you're on time for things and appointments and whatnot. And that's called a watch or a wristwatch, of course, so make sure that they know those two words.